cleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves.
To dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Obviously, here he's talking about idolatry. He says in verse 25, give me 25, read 25 for me.
Who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever.
Is adultery. This is idolatry. So it says it's a resistance. Man sees what God's mind is. Man sees what God's knowledge is. Man resists God's knowledge and goes for any other knowledge that is a contradiction. Deliberate act of man's will. In verse 24, it talks about desires. Desires. So now we have uncontrolled desires. Which means that the key aspect about sin here is human volition. Human volition. Sin is a product of human volition. Human volition to knowledge. Human volition to knowledge. A knowledge of God that comes to a man and his action towards it is what Paul is defining here. A knowledge of God that comes to man and man's action towards that knowledge is what Brother Paul is taking time to lay out here. He says, so by an act of their will, he gave them over. Since they said we don't want the knowledge, he didn't force them. So his inactivity is the giving them over, and his inactivity is because they refuse to retain him in their knowledge. They gave him over to a reprobate mind so that they can do things that are not convenient. Please pay attention. Paul here is explaining idolatry because he had said earlier in Romans 1:20, give me that Romans chapter 1 verse 20. Romans 1:20.
For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse.
Clearly seen. They are without excuse. Now, so the point here remains that Paul is explaining idolatry to you. That it's a resistance of knowledge. Now, I'm going to deal with this in a bit in the process of this teaching within the week. So it's a deliberate change, a refusal to retain the knowledge of God. A deliberate change, a refusal to retain the knowledge of God. Look at something. It's not God gave them up. No, they gave God up for uncleanness. They gave God up. So right from Romans chapter 1, Paul is explaining man's volition as the key principle for sin. Man's volition as the key principle for sin. That's the foundation Brother Paul is laying. So if anybody is talking about a nature of sin, that nature of sin is man's will. If anybody is talking about a nature of sin, that nature of sin is man's will. And it doesn't need to be a nature of sin. It doesn't need to be a nature of sin. It's just that aspect of man that can choose. It's not really a nature. Is an aspect of man that can make the choice. So you can't call that a nature. Hey, you can't call that a nature. It's choice. That aspect of man that can say, I don't want the knowledge of God. And that can say, I have decided to go for things that are not convenient. God, excuse me. And God will excuse you. Oh yes, he will. Oh yes, he will. He's not going to force it on you. He loves you so much that he will let you have your way. Love does not insist on its own. Love will allow you have your way. And even in having your way, love will still be nice to you on your way to your own thing. They gave God up, but how many of you know God never really gives up? He keeps seeking until it can no more be sought. We'll get there. We will see it in the next service this morning, that aspect of man that can choose. And we will go to Genesis and do some real good work here in the next service. I can't wait for that. So you see that in Romans 1, there was a choice pattern. They did not retain God in their knowledge. That means there was a refusal. Man refused God. So the motions of sin is traced to man's will. The motions of sin is traced to man's will. What makes man man is his ability to choose. What makes man man is his ability to choose. Once you cannot choose, you are not man. The moment you are denied the ability to choose, you are a robot. What makes you man is that you can say no and say yes. That's why witchcraft is to deny you what you want. That's witchcraft. Witchcraft is to override your will by intimidation, domination, or manipulation. That's witchcraft. A husband who beats his wife into submission is a witch. And a wife who harasses her husband to do what he doesn't want to do is also a witch. Witchcraft is not flying in the dream. Witchcraft is oppressing a man and making that man lose what makes him a man. Because what makes you a man is the ability to say yes, no, I want this, I don't want it. That's what makes you a man. So anybody that denies you that ability has bewitched you. That's why Paul will say, "Oh, foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you?" Not who has been flying around you in the dream. Who has bewitched you here is who has overridden your will and compel you to do what is contrary to what you know. You know that Jesus is evidently crucified before you. But why have you abandoned the knowledge of Christ for works? Who is controlling your will against the knowledge available to you in this regard? I'm teaching good. What makes man man is that ability to choose. That's why even society has a fundamental human right to protect man's will. Even society globally has laws that protect a man's will. Right to life, right to worship, right to choose things. Because that is what defines man. And it is within that sin can be explained. Even doctrinally. I'm teaching good here. Pay attention. But that, as it sounds nice, is a huge responsibility. Huge responsibility. Look at Romans 1:18. Romans chapter 1 verse 18.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness.
Who hold the truth in unrighteousness. They hold the truth. The word hold the truth there means to arrest, to restrain the truth. Actually, it's a word katacho in the Greek. K-A-T-E-C-H-O, katacho. Again, explaining the motions of what sin is. Katechio. So when we get to Romans 3:23, much later, we will unbundle it more than we did on Friday. Because in many instances, it has been carelessly used. Because you see, sin has to do with knowledge. Never forget that. Sin has to do with knowledge. There can't be sin without knowledge. There can't be sin without knowledge. And the knowledge doesn't need to be knowledge that Christ died for your sins. The knowledge doesn't have to be knowledge that Christ died for your sins. There has to be knowledge before sin. Notice that in Romans chapter 1, the emphasis was knowledge, as they do not like to retain God in their knowledge. Look at Romans chapter 5. But before we read, I want you to know that we're just still laying foundation, right? Hello? Okay. Romans 5:12. Read for me. Romans chapter 5, verse 12.
Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned.
It will be careless to say that everybody sinned because one man sinned. That would be contradictory, because the sin here, hamatano, is a verb. It's a verb. You can't say, I slapped this chair because you slapped this chair. No. If you slap this chair, I won't be guilty of that offense until I myself slap it. So, for all have sinned is the word hamatano, which is a verb, which means there's an action to it. Which means it's not automatic. Which means it's not automatic. There's an action to it. There can be a verb without an action. So again, look at that Romans chapter 5 verse 12. Romans 5:12. Read for me.
Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned.
Give me verse 14 of that Romans chapter 5, verse 14.
Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the similitude of Adam's transgression.
So hold it. Even over them that have not sinned, for all have sinned. Right next after that, even over them that had not sinned. So all really have not sinned. For all have sinned, verse 12, and come short of the glory of God. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed where there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the pattern of sin that was to come. So there are those that didn't sin the sin of Adam, which automatically means that the sin of Adam is not automatic on humanity. Honey, you know, if the sin of Adam was automatic, Abel would have been a sinner. But Abel was not a sinner in the house of Adam, a sinner who is the father of Abel. Which is not automatic. That's why you can't say you are born a sinner. You are not born a sinner. Nobody is born a sinner, because all have sinned is a verb. There's an action that is required. And what action did you carry out in your mother's womb? What action did you carry out? Because this is the foundation of human problem. If you get this right, your life will be okay. All sinned and come short of the glory of God. Wherefore, as by one man sin, death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Nevertheless, death reign from Adam to Moses, even over them that have not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression. So there are those who have not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, beginning from a child in Adam's house called Abel. Abel was not a sinner. Never. Cain was a sinner. Abel's brother. Same house. Abel was righteous. So which means it's not automatic. Everybody becomes a sinner on his own merit. On his own merit. I'm teaching good. Even over them that have not sinned, negative, which is me amatano, 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 not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression. So basically the sin must be an activity. An activity must be perceived. An activity is being described. So the issue in verse 14 is after the similitude of Adam's transgression. So that means Adam's transgression was a pattern. And there are sins that don't have that pattern. Adam's transgression was a pattern. And there are sins that don't have that pattern. So Romans chapter 5 verse 12 will be general. Adam therefore became exemplary for all that sinned afterward. He became exemplary. But not all sinned